The breeze startled me. I stood on the porch barefoot, the ceramic mug of coffee cooling rapidly in my hand. The Carolina air carried that particular in-between chill, the morning not yet warm, the night not fully gone. It was a transitional moment, and I was a creature of transition myself, caught between the person I had been and the one I was becoming, a process I did not yet understand. The wind came suddenly, an insistent gust pulling at the thin cotton of my sundress, lifting the hem higher than I would ever consciously allow, if I had not been so utterly caught off guard. And that's when I saw him. Mark, my son-in-law, my daughter's husband. He froze at the top of the steps, a toolbox hanging uselessly from one hand, his eyes locked not on my face but on the brief, exposed strip of my thigh, a pulse beat of frantic, visible rhythm in the hollow of his throat. 1 second. That truly is all it took to change the entire topography of my life, to reroute the river of my future into a channel both terrifying and exhilarating. He said nothing. I said nothing. The silence between us became its own language, a complex grammar of shock, appraisal, and a terrifying mutual recognition. It wasn't simple shock that flickered across his face. It was something older, something more dangerous and primal. That moment lingered in the air between us, fragile as a soap bubble, but heavy as lead, as if the whole world had drawn in a breath and was waiting for the two of us to decide what it meant. I didn't know then, standing there with the morning cool against my skin, that it would be the beginning of something I would both crave and regret, the first note of a symphony of ruin. My name is Lorraine. I am 60 years old, and my life has grown quiet. Too quiet. I live just outside Savannah in a neat white house that still smells faintly of the man who left it, a ghost of his cologne in the closet, a whisper of his pipe tobacco in the study. My husband of 34 years walked out 2 summers ago, a departure so quiet it was more of an evaporation than an event. He didn't take much, just his clothes, his expensive cologne, and most critically, the parts of me that used to feel alive and desired. He left for someone younger, someone whose laughter came easily and didn't sound like a forgotten language. I didn't cry when he left. I had cried enough in the final hollow years when he was still physically present, a ghost in his own home. The tears had all been spent, leaving behind a vast, arid quiet. Mark is 35. He is my daughter Julia's husband. They met in college when love still felt simple and limitless, a boundless country they had just discovered. She once told me, her voice giddy with newness, that he made her feel truly seen. But lately, her calls had taken on a different tone. She said he was distant, unreachable, that he was somewhere far away even when he was sitting right beside her on their sofa. I had offered the usual maternal platitudes, blaming work stress, the pressures of fatherhood. I had no idea how far he had really drifted, or toward what shore, until that morning on the porch. He tried to steady his voice when he finally spoke, shattering the charged silence. "Morning, Lorraine." His tone was rough, cracking like old paint on a sun-bleached wall. I tugged my sweater closed, a futile gesture of pretended composure. "You're early," I murmured, though I hadn't known he was coming at all. He offered a faint, awkward smile, a flicker of uncertainty. "Julia said you needed someone to check your gutters." That was a lie. I hadn't said a word to Julia about any gutters. But instead of questioning it, of upholding the fragile barrier of truth, I simply stepped aside, the screen door creaking a protest. "Come in." He walked past me, so close that the air between us seemed to change, to grow thick and warm with his passing. I told myself I was imagining it, the warmth, the pull, the undeniable current. But even after he had left, the space he had occupied in my hallway, in my kitchen, lingered, imprinted with his presence. That night, standing before my bedroom mirror, I didn't study the familiar lines of age or time. I studied my own eyes, searching for the woman he had seen in that fleeting, unguarded moment. What did he see? And worse, a treacherous voice inside me whispered, why did I so desperately want him to see it? He came back the next day. No warning, no call. His truck rolled into my gravel driveway like it belonged there. The sound of its engine an unwelcome and yet thrilling intrusion. This time I was prepared. I wore a dress that covered everything, sensible shoes, and a calm demeanor that was mostly an act. "Still worried about the gutters?" I asked, my voice carefully light. He smiled, a slow, deliberate gesture as he rubbed the back of his neck. Actually, Julia said your kitchen faucet's leaking. Another lie. Another chance deliberately thrown at my feet. And once again, I let him in. We sat in the kitchen, the old grandfather clock in the hall ticking too loudly, marking seconds that felt stolen. I moved dishes that didn't need moving, just to have a reason to avoid the intensity of his gaze. Then he asked, "You doing all right, Lorraine?" The question landed heavier than it should have, carrying a weight of genuine concern that I had not felt from anyone in years. "I'm fine," I said, the automatic response. "Why?" He looked down, his thumb tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "You seem quieter lately," I smiled faintly. "That's because I am." He nodded slowly as if I had confirmed a deep suspicion. "Sometimes I walk around the house with Julia and feel like a stranger there. Like we're both just pretending to remember how to love each other." I leaned in. Too far. The words came out before I could stop them. Marriage isn't always a home. Sometimes it's just a hallway with too many locked doors. That was the line that opened one. For 2 hours, we did not talk about faucets or gutters. We talked about loss. The specific, gnawing loneliness that sets in when you are technically not alone, and the people we used to be before life sanded down our edges. He said he missed being noticed, truly noticed, for who he was beneath the roles of husband and provider. I confessed I missed the woman I was when someone looked at me with love, with desire. When he reached for the sugar, his hand brushed against mine. We froze, a tiny spark jumping between us in the charged air. I could have pulled away. I should have. I didn't. After my husband left, I had realized with a slow dawning horror that what I missed most wasn't him, not the man he had become. It was the sensation of being seen. And Mark, in his quiet, conflicted way, saw me, not the 60-year-old woman, not his wife's mother, but me, Lorraine, the person who still existed beneath the layers of disappointment and routine. He began stopping by more often. Each visit was easier, more natural than the last. The lies to Julia became smaller, more intricate, while the silences between Mark and me grew longer, more profound, filled with things we dared not say aloud. One evening, as he stood at the door preparing to leave, he whispered, "I tell you things I don't even tell Julia." He looked at me, his gaze searching. "Is that wrong?" I met his eyes, my own heartbeat loud in my ears. "Maybe," I said, my voice barely audible, "but it feels honest." He nodded once, a sharp, decisive motion, like a man who had been waiting for permission to step off a cliff. By the third time, there were no excuses left. No talk of gutters or leaking sinks. Julia was away for the weekend with the kids. His truck appeared again, the same familiar sight, but this time he didn't knock. He just stood there on the porch, waiting, his hands shoved into his pockets. I opened the door, stepped aside without a word. He entered quietly, like someone coming home to a place they know they shouldn't be. We sat in the living room, the late afternoon sunlight spilling across the worn Persian carpet. Dust motes floating like a million tiny secrets in the still air. There were no words, no movement. Just a tension so thick and palpable it felt like a third presence in the room. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice trembling with the effort, though his eyes were steady and clear. "I think about you more than I should." The words hung between us, a confession and an accusation. I felt my heart catch in my throat, a physical pain. "Do you think about Julia when you're here?" I asked, the question a final flimsy barrier. His jaw tightened. "I try to." We sat side by side on the sofa, the scant few inches of space between us pulsing with a life of its own. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, hear the soft rhythm of his breathing, taste the decision waiting to happen, metallic and sharp on my tongue. He lifted his hand slowly, hovering it in the space between us, an open question, waiting for me to provide the answer. I didn't take it, but I wanted to. He leaned closer, not enough to cross the line, just enough to test its tensile strength, to see if I would move, if I would flinch. I didn't move toward him. I didn't move away. I remained perfectly, terribly still. And sometimes, that very stillness, that suspension of morality, is precisely where the truest, most profound betrayal begins.